I'm your host, and today my guest is David Misson. He is Head of Performance at the Sydney Roosters, and his topic of discussion will be all around leadership and culture in high performance. David is a highly experienced leader with a 25-year background in high performance and team dynamics. He has worked with some of Australia's most respected and successful organisations, such as the Australian cricket team, the Sydney Swans Football Club, and Tennis Australia. Before we start this episode, for those new to our podcast, our mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to inspire aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for jumping on, mate.
Thanks, Jack. Great to be here. Let's
dive in the beginning of your career. At what age did you discover you had a passion for high performance and more specifically, strength and conditioning, working with elite athletes?
Yeah, look, I was a track and field athlete myself. I ran 400 hurdles. Wasn't quite fast enough to really crack, national teams and things like that. But, I had a long career training with some really great athletes and coaches, and really fell into track and field coaching after I gave it away myself as an athlete. And I think, track and field certainly gave me a great grounding for strength and conditioning and a career in that, because you're working on all of those different parameters and facets of, getting strong, getting fast, getting fit, getting powerful. So that background really sort of helped me, I think.
And having that background, as you mentioned, as being an athlete, and then going into as a coach, do you feel like it helps practitioners that have got that sense of what it's like going through, tough training blocks and competing at high level in terms of a coaching performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, track and field is obviously, movement based, and most of the big sports in Australia are movement based sports. And I felt that just, I just sort of came into strength and conditioning, with a really good head start, I think, because of my background in track and field. And the roles that I got initially, and they were very, very part-time roles. So with with the AIS rugby program and Tennis Australia, was a lot about improving the movement capacity of their players and athletes. In rugby, it was analysing running technique and providing some input there to players, and it just sort of evolved from there.
And were there more opportunities in team-based sports? Is that why you gravitated towards being a track and field coach and athlete at that time, or was it simply a passion project of yours?
It's probably more money, Jack, I reckon, in team-based sports. Yeah, look, I love track and field coaching, but back in those days, it was even an imposition to ask your athletes to pay a nominal fee, unlike, say, even swimming, where, swimmers would pay their coaches, and that was just accepted way of doing things. But even in track and field, it started coming in, but you felt as a coach that it was a bit of an imposition because these guys weren't earning any money at all. And but I love that. It gave me a great grounding to, as I said, move into the team sport area.
Yeah. And what about from a connection point of view? Like, obviously you mentioned the technical attributes that transferred over into team sports and allowed you to get these part-time roles quite early on in your career. But do you feel like from a connection point of view, you have empathy with high-performing athletes by experiencing it yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sort of knowing what they were going through, being able to really, I suppose, add value to their program, because you're working with a lot of sports that were skill-based, tennis, rugby, cricket, whatever, netball. So they were skill-based sports, but from a strength and conditioning point of view, a lot of these sports were still, in the early stages of realising how important strength and conditioning could be to a performance and a season. So you felt coming in that you could really add some value to the program and to the athlete.
And for the S&Cs listening in that don't have that weapon yet, where they can add value from a skills point of view to a program, so the program, they're not getting headhunted or they're not getting invited into the program, so they need to try and develop that. What would be your advice for developing a strength when you're early on in your career to get those opportunities?
Yeah, just to get a real diverse range of experiences and not necessarily paid ones, and some of them are pretty hard to come by. And And even at the Roosters, we sort of got an intern program, and I think it's an accepted thing these days that people coming straight out of uni will do an internship where they won't be earning any money, but hopefully they're going to be learning some great skills. But my advice would be to try and get a diverse range of skills, and probably more specifically, improve your movement IQ. If you're not from a track and field background, or you don't have a movement based background, I think that's an area that you should really try and upskill yourself in.
And going back to your progression early on in your career, did you have strong influences that helped you shape your development, or mentors, if you like?
Yeah, I did. My track and field coaches, and had a couple of those significantly who really helped me. The school that I went to, the high school that I went to, Waverley College, had a really, really strong track and field program, and their head coach, was a big influence on me 10 years down the track, on how to run a professional program and how to, work through processes and systems, with a big group of athletes. But I've got a guy probably in particular. He's actually a tennis coach. When I first started working with Tennis Australia, a guy called Ken Richardson, who taught me a lot about just being on the road and working with athletes. And probably the main thing he taught me was that it's all about the athlete. Whatever you're doing, whatever program you're implementing, whatever situation you're in, it's about helping the athlete get the best out of themselves at any given time.
And that might sound obvious, but what can distract coaches away from that focus being all about the athlete?
Yeah, look, it's often about choices, and funny, we're on a tennis circuit within Australia where our players are playing sort of 4 tournaments in a row, week after week. And in a tennis tournament, if you get knocked out, then your week's essentially over. So it was about understanding, well, if your player got knocked out in the second round, their week wasn't over with you, because you had a really good chance there to do a couple of days of real solid work with them. The tennis coaches get them on the court and really get them ready for the next week. But it's not over. What am I trying to say? It's sort of, you're thinking about the athlete all the time and thinking about their next competition and their next event, and trying to plan how best you can get them up for that, especially if they've had a disappointing week the previous week. It was really all about, every day you get up, it's about thinking, well, what's the best preparation for the athletes that we're working with, both today, but also, in the short term and medium term.
Do you have a process, whether it be driving to work, where you start shifting into focusing on the athlete, or like you mentioned, when you first wake up, or is there a reflection piece as well at the end of the day? Like, talk us through how you like to plan your weeks and sort of, I guess, your mindset as a coach.
Yeah, probably Sunday arvos. Like I really used to enjoy, and still do, sitting down on a Sunday arvo and 4 o'clock and having a couple of hours before dinner, really, getting the week, visualizing the week in my head, and then sitting down and planning it. Also, I like to train most mornings. So, if I'm sitting on a watt bike or something like that, then, that seems to be where I actually get quite creative. So, I'll train with a little notebook on my phone, and, if ideas come into my head, then, I'll use that time to help sort of build some sort of information around the basic plans that I've nutted out.
Yep. And you mentioned, going back to your career journey, part-time gigs that you were getting in a range of different sports. What was your first full-time contract in elite sport?
Yeah, I was telling someone the other day, it was with the Aussie cricket team, and
not a bad way to start.
The advertisement in that was on the inside back page of the Daily Telegraph, believe it or not. So,
oh, wow.
So I cut out the advert and put a CV together, and then we're on a family holiday on the way to the Gold Coast, and I remember sort of dropping the application into a letterbox in Coolangatta and hoping for the best, and luckily it came off.
And what was the role?
Yeah, it was sort of head of strength and conditioning with the team.
Yep.
It was a role that had been spoken about for probably 12 months leading up to me being given the role. Jeff Marsh was the coach, and he'd been used to having a full, an almost full-time S&C with the Western Australian setup where he came from, and he pushed pretty hard with the cricket board to have it with the Aussie setup, and it was just fantastic. There was Jeff, the head coach, there was Errol Alcott at the time, who was head physio, and myself. So not only S&C, but I found myself being a pretty solid net bowler, and learning how to run fielding sessions, and put on a catching mitt to the fast bowlers when they warmed up before the start of a day's play. So that job just taught me so much, not just about strength and conditioning, but leadership and culture as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Like, what does high performance culture mean to you?
Oh, geez. That's an
open-ended question.
Really big question. But look, at the end of the day, it's about creating an environment that is going to allow your people to thrive, and particularly your players, and an environment where they feel safe, but they feel challenged, and they feel that everyone is pulling in the same direction. And these things sound really easy to create, but I haven't found too many organisations or teams where it's been achieved really well. And luckily, I stepped straight into a setup in my first full-time job where that was the case, particularly when Steve Waugh took over as captain. That was a real eye-opening moment for me.
And there's probably another open-ended question, but in terms of high-performance culture, obviously it's a buzzword and always will be in elite sport, but do you feel like to win the grand prize, if it is a premiership or championship, whatever the league is, and you take it out, to be a sustained success, you need high performance culture, or is it a matter of once you win, then you've already got to that point and it's a matter of just managing it?
Yeah, high performance culture. I think it's about a good culture amongst the whole staff. I think about the AFL teams I've been part of, and when we were successful, it was about the coaches, the medical staff, the strength and conditioning staff, the recruiting staff, really all being on the same page and being able to communicate really clearly, having real clarity around roles, but also being able to challenge each other and not feel that it was a personal attack, that this was all about getting our club and our players to be better. And it's an amazing environment to be in when that happens. It really is. And as I said, I haven't encountered it too much, but when I have, it's been electrifying, really. So and it has led to success, but it doesn't always lead to success, because you've also got to have some really good players. It comes down to having good players running out there every week as well.
Yeah. And on that, I guess to clarify, like that's sort of what I was getting at. Like, can you win and still be looking good on paper in terms of success externally, but have really poor culture? Or do you think to get ultimate success, you have to have all areas covered?
Look, you don't have to have the greatest of staff environments, but if you've got a great team and they're being really well coached, you can win. Mm-hmm. But if you've got a really poor environment and the other stuff isn't being ticked off, if your playing group is mediocre, there's absolutely no way you're going to win. Mm-hmm. But having a great environment and having a great bunch of players, you're going a long way towards being successful. Absolutely.
Yeah. And no doubt that because of COVID, unfortunately, there's been a real shuffle in the industry with new staff working together. What do you think takes longer to develop with a new team from a staff perspective? The not taking things personally when you're challenging, or getting on the same page?
Look, I think first and foremost, it's, and what I've learned this year with the Roosters, it's been clarity around roles. People need to know what their roles are and what's expected of them. And then, they need to be able to live up to those expectations. And the job of a leader is to really clearly illustrate and explain and communicate what's expected of each individual within their roles. And then it's about, being able to challenge each other and challenge other people in your department if you don't think that they're doing the right thing, or if you think that things can be done differently and better. That's really important, but that can take time because that requires strong relationships. And again, I've learnt this year, it's probably taken us 12 months at the Roosters for the S&C and medical guys to get to know each other and to have, good relationships and be able to challenge each other. So, it's been a really, really great year getting to know some of the people in and around this rugby league club.
And is it on that note, like as a leader in a new team, like do you have set sort of workshops or activities that you like to do that have worked in the past that you roll out into new environments, or is it each environment a bit different? Everyone's a little bit unique, and it just does simply take time and needs to be natural.
Yeah, at the beginning, when I first started, probably this time next year, we came together as a staff group, and there are some things. I was out of elite sport for a couple of years where I did a Masters of Leadership, and some of the things that I learnt there, I rolled out to the guys 12 months ago just to get to know each other a bit better and just to probably connect and open up and be a little bit vulnerable. But at the end of the day, it's just about spending some time with each other and going through tough losses or, a run of injuries or, just other challenges where you're forced to come together and really sit down and talk about, well, what's happened, how can we do this better, and what are we going to learn for next time?
Yeah. And going back to your career progression, you've had the luxury and also being able to work in a range of different environments. Was that a focus of yours early on, or was it something that just sort of happened through doing, I imagine, good job at one club, and then you build your network and it starts to, you start getting headhunted in different programs? But yeah, how intentional was it to work in all the different types of sports that you've been able to do over your career?
Yeah, look, pardon me, it wasn't intentional at all. As I said, like my track and field and, my speed development background allowed me to land a couple of roles early, working in, rugby union, cricket, tennis, netball. And then, things just, happened. And, as I say, I applied for the Aussie team and got that job. And then, moving into the Swans after that, it was right place at the right time. The late Steve Lawson, who was football manager at the Swans, a great man with a cricket background. Him and I used to catch up whenever I'd come off the road from a cricket trip. And one of those times he said, look, we're looking for a head S&C at the Swans. And it just happened to be a time where I needed to get off the road. I had 2 young kids and my wife wanted to go back to work. And so I just sort of fell into that. And AFL to me really suited my skill set. I was a 400-metre runner. I sort of felt that these guys were almost 200, 400, 800-metre athletes, and trained them like that. So, things just evolved from there. And, 20 years later, I find myself in rugby league, which is actually where I started with one of my part-time gigs initially, so.
And working in different sports, like from a skill set point of view as an S&C, like what do you gain from it?
Yeah, like I've been around sport all my life. My father was a cricketer and my mum was a track and field athlete. So I felt I had a really good intuitive sense of whatever sport I watched. I could sort of pick up the nuances of sports, and I found that when I started working in sport as well. I would intentionally spend a lot of time with the coaches, say with a tennis coach, and try to understand the game more. Netball and rugby union, even though I played it at school. But AFL was a game that I'd watched a little bit of, but never played and, never been involved in. And just spending time with some smart people, smart AFL people, helped me understand the game and fast track my education there.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the transference of doing conditioning work from the, like a 400-metre runner for track and field, learning the different things like the wrestling component and the weights work. How would you go about doing that? Was that all internal, like you said, working with some smart coaches and practitioners, or would you research, speak to other practitioners in the industry? How would you sort of self-develop during that new phase when you're working on it with a new team? New sport, sorry.
I'd do all of that, and any courses that say practical courses that would be available, I'd take advantage of those, and really talking to other practitioners. And when I was coming through 25, 30 years ago, there are a lot of people in my roles who were quite secretive. They didn't want to, pass on what they felt were their secrets and, the special way that they used to do things. But there are also others who were really open and willing to share. And those are the guys that and ladies that I would, associate with and learn from particularly. So,
yeah. And moving over to the sports science sort of data analytics, how would you sort of marry up between the art of coaching and sports science? Obviously, it's developed a fair bit more recently, but how do you balance the two in your current role as head of performance?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges for practitioners at the moment. But I think at the end of the day, like, we've got to remember we're working with people, and every person's different. And you've got to understand that, each athlete, what you ask them to do and, a program that you provide for them, they will respond differently to that. So from an art point of view, you've got to understand your people. You've got to be intuitive enough to know, how your staff are going, how your players are going in particular, and be able to adjust based on what you're seeing there. In saying that, we're at a moment in time where we're just getting so much data on our athletes. So it's really about understanding what matters and what's important. And, we always talk about, measuring what matters at the Roosters and, being honest about, well, what can we intervene with? If data is telling us something about our athletes, is it actually something we're going to intervene and make a difference? I think the other thing is the data needs to tell a story to the athlete. We're providing athletes with GPS reports for training and games, but what does it mean for a rugby league player to run 8.5 metres per second in a kick chase? What's the difference between 8.5 and 7.5? So, you need to show them, on video and through vision, the fact that they ran 8.5 metres per second means that they could have, they were able to tackle the fullback in the in goal and force a repeat set. So things like that, where you're showing the athletes, well, if you hadn't have run that fast, you wouldn't have got that result. And this is what it looked like. Because, a lot of the players and athletes that we're dealing with are visual learners, so you need to be able to tell that story with your data.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. At the end of the day, it is their data. So to be able to show them how you're using it and how effective it could be so then when you're next asking him to open up and do some strides or sprints in training and you want to hit that 8.5, he's going to probably refer back to that moment of how important it was in that game.
That's exactly right. And you're getting out on the training track and you're getting them to do MAS or, repeat 80-metre sprints or something like that. And they're saying, well, why are we doing this? And exactly, you're referring, well, remember that video I showed you last week? This is the difference between tackling the fullback in goal or the fullback, getting out to the 10 metres and them having a full set. So,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And what about for the technical, tactical coaches? How do you sort of use GPS with them, whether it be in meetings or while you're planning training sessions?
Yeah, look, the same way, in a way, and the good coaches will always say, well, why are we doing this? Why are you prescribing this session? And I always find that, really good, because you've got to justify, why you're prescribing a certain, training plan and training program. So, a lot of coaches, and our current coach, is really sports science intelligent. So, you can go through a GPS report with him and he'll absolutely understand it. But, some you've got to just, talk them through it and walk them through it and say, well, this is what this is showing and this is why we're doing a certain drill or a certain, training session and make sure that, you're able to justify it and it's absolutely relative to the game model that they're trying to roll out.
Yeah. And going back to planning and processes, you've mentioned a few that you routinely do during the week, whether it be while you're training, you're getting creative with your training prescription and Sunday afternoons is sort of your thinking time in terms of what visualizing the week. What are some other sort of high performance sort of planning processes that you've you're in routine in doing in season or might be in pre-season that you find is quite effective?
Yeah, look, I suppose my big thing, I like to start with the macro cycle and work down. I really like the long-term plan and being able to, for example, we spent last week looking at our pre-Christmas and our post-Christmas before round one already for 2023. And for me, I love that. I love working on that sort of macro cycle, because that then gives me structure and it gives me a framework that I can then, put our other loading cycles through. So I'm always starting from the big framework and the macro cycle and then working my way down. And that's something that I've always done because I really enjoy it.
Yeah. And who would participate in those meetings? Is it head coach, or is it a few other people as well?
Yeah, we had our whole, footy staff, like coaches and high performance and medical. So
yep.
Again, I'm someone, and Trent, my coach at the moment, really appreciates input from everyone, and that can probably make the meetings go a little bit longer. And because everyone's sometimes got something to say, but I'd rather that than just two people nutting it out, and you get to 3 weeks into your pre-Christmas and think, geez, we hadn't considered this, or we've overlooked that. So it's a pretty democratic process.
And you mentioned the importance of having a healthy environment where people can challenge each other. Does that change depending on who's in the room, or do you think that's the way it should be? As long as it's done respectfully, of course, you should always, no matter who's in the room, you should be able to challenge each other respectfully, as in staff members.
Yeah, I think so. And look, the 2 years I was out of sport, I studied, but also worked in corporate in leadership and culture. And, psychological safety is the big thing with corporate teams at the moment. And it's no different to sporting teams and staff within sporting teams. You need to be able to feel comfortable and confident that if you say something, it's not going to be held against you. And if you say something about someone that's constructive, that hopefully they're not going to take that personally. But there needs to be a safe environment, and you as the speaker and the other person potentially as the listener and the receiver needs to feel that it's coming from the right place.
Yeah. And looking back over your career to this point, what are some highlights that spring to mind that you look back on fondly and that you're proud of? Yeah,
look, the 99 Cricket World Cup is, a really, it's amazing. It was an amazing time and a really hard time. And that's what happens in high performance sport. You have some amazing successes, but it's also straddled by a tough period. I didn't see my kids for 5 months at that time. We had a tour to the West Indies straight after an Australian summer in February 99, and then went straight from that West Indian tour to England for the World Cup. So I was away from sort of February until June. And my wife came over for a couple of weeks, but, I didn't see the kids. But, that 99 World Cup where everyone had written us off and, we were almost out, even before the semi-final stages. And then that amazing game, where we drew with South Africa and then went on to beat Pakistan was unbelievable. And then obviously, 05 premiership with the Swans was an incredible time as well, breaking that 72-year sort of hoodoo and being part of a really special group of not only players but staff as well.
During both of those times, looking back now, did you sort of intuitively, and did the staff intuitively and leaders, players, the environment have a feeling that success was on the horizon during those years? Or was there reference points, or is it something that's too hard to pick until it happens?
Look, I say the Swans example, when Ruzi took over mid 02, we made a prelim in 2003 and got beaten by Brisbane, who went on to win it. And I think we all knew 2003, that we were onto something special here, with Ruzi's game plan, and coincided with bringing Ray McLean in, from leading teams and developing the Bloods culture. And they were just a special group of players as well. And again, it sort of coincided with an amazing sort of medical strength and conditioning team that was so close. and really aligned and connected. And it was just a lot of things came together at that time. And it was a really successful era. We lost the next year only by a point, but it was a great, it really set up this sort of Swans dynasty in a way that hopefully will continue, tomorrow.
Yeah. And during that phase, were key staff members, you mentioned how connected the team was. Did you lose key staff members? Like sometimes when the club has success that people can get poached. Did you lose anyone, or did you have anyone? Did you have this sort of same team for a couple of years there?
Yeah, no, we didn't. Look, Andrew Ireland, who went on to become the CEO of the Swans, he was the football manager, and he was a great mentor of mine, and sort of still is. And he just created an environment and set up sort of clarity and expectations around all of our roles, and then just encouraged us to go for it. Now I think what he did, he came from the Brisbane setup. They won 3 in a row, and he made us realise how important our roles were within that, in that environment, and how important strength and conditioning and medical and high performance generally was in an AFL setup. And we had great sort of injury records in that period of time, and we prided ourselves on making our players fit and available, because we realised that getting your best team on the park is going to go a long way towards you being successful.
And how did Andrew do that differently to other CEOs that you've worked with in the past? Was it a one-on-one, the way he sort of spoke with each practitioner, or is it in a group sort of level? How did he do a good job of making
probably a couple
value?
of ways? Playing and working for Sydney, then we were on the road every second week. So, whether this is right or wrong, we'd get together the night before a game and get in the manager's room and have a couple of beers, and we would end up talking shop for 3 or 4 hours. And we look back on those times, and we absolutely think that just talking to each other and spending time with each other, and you get to know each other and you have great relationships. But we literally spoke shop for 3 or 4 hours each time we get together, and solve a lot of problems and chuck up a lot of theories and challenge each other. But then Andrew also would go to a board meeting and say, I need some money to be put aside so these guys can go and study other clubs around the world. And every January, we would go over and we'd, go to Spain and have a look at Barcelona. We go to AC Milan and look at their special, AC Milan lab, which was amazing. So Andrew realised that to keep being at the cutting edge, you had to expose yourself to that, and you couldn't always do that just being in Australia. You had to, seek teams and organisations who could provide that intel for you.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Thanks for sharing. On the flip side, challenges that you've faced over your career, and what did you learn, or how did you grow from facing those challenges?
Biggest challenge, I don't like losing very often. So, I think, losing grand finals is really challenging. 06 was a little bit more palatable because we'd won it the year before, but, the St Kilda group in 9 and 10, it's probably my biggest regret in sport is that those players and the coach, Ross Lyon, a great friend of mine and probably the best coach I've worked with, didn't go on to be premiership players and a premiership coach because they were just such great people and they worked so hard. But in saying that, they're a really tight-knit group right now. Every single year they get together prelim final Friday and have a lunch and they're constantly looking out for each other. And, I was talking to one of the players just the other day and, we're just sort of reminiscing and saying that, you don't need to win a flag and be a premiership player to keep an eye on your teammates and be a really close, tight-knit group. But they're probably some of the, that's probably as I say, the biggest disappointment for me was that group not winning one because we went so close.
Yeah, it's such a unique week as well because that was obviously when you had that extra game or the following week from the draw.
Yeah.
How did that week go? I couldn't imagine, how it would be playing in a grand final draw and doing that week all again. Must have been an interesting one.
Yeah, it was. And I sort of went on the international rules trip at the end of that season and Mick was the coach I reckon I was clinically depressed, because we'd had a drawn grand final and then lost the replay, and we were just so shattered. And a couple of the Saints players were on that trip as well. But look, we were really physically spent after the draw. I think we were 4 goals down in the game, and just it took everything to get back and draw that game. And then, Milne's kick, and the feeling was that, geez, there were a couple of moments in that game that just could have gone our way. And to his credit, Mick. So you had the club dinners after each grand final, sort of win or lose. You go to these club dinners, and we decided that we needed our players to go home and go to bed and try and start our recovery process. But Mick insisted the Collingwood guys go to the dinner and thank supporters, and understanding that players probably weren't going to sleep after a grand final. And he sort of framed it in a way. He said to his players, because they probably didn't play as well as they would have hoped in that first one, he said, well, you're not often given a second chance in grand finals. And, this is half time and the scores are equal, and we got the second half next week. And, history will tell you they came out and belted us. So, it was a really interesting week. So,
yeah, crazy. I was speaking to someone the other day. I think we're wondering what happens if it is a draw at VFL level, and then we were talking about that week, and it was the first time I'd thought about it as a someone that's working in the industry, about how it'd just be bizarre to try and pick yourself up, everyone, and get back on track. But unique experience. Thanks for sharing. From a moving over to the more personal sort of side of the podcast now, mate. Are you a quotes man? Have you got a favourite inspirational quote or life motto?
Yeah, it's sort of one from Aristotle that I've used for 25 years, and that is, we are what we repeatedly do. So excellence is, it's not a one-off, it's not an act, it's a habit. And I try and sort of explain that to your players, that, it's what you do every single day, that you turn up to your footy club or your netball club or your cricket club with the mindset of trying to improve, because the way you go about it every day is just the type of player you then become, and you can't just pull it out of the bag on game day or in big games. It's got to be a repeated sort of thing. So that's the one that's held me in good stead for plenty of time, plenty of years.
And what about in your work life? Have you got pet peeves, anything that fires you up?
Pet peeves. Yeah, probably people who don't have attention to detail, a lack of attention to detail. Like, I'm a pretty detailed person. So, near enough certainly isn't good enough for me. So if someone's just skipping over some of the finer details, then that annoys me, because often down the track that'll get found out and mistakes will be made. Pet peeves, probably people with egos who, people in our roles who think that it's about them. That really, really annoys me, because it's the absolute opposite. It's not about you at all. It's about, you creating the environment and the program to make your players better. So, I'm a pretty low-key person. I don't sort of seek limelight at all and notoriety, because for me, my satisfaction comes when my players and team are winning. Ego is something that I don't enjoy seeing in other people, to be honest.
Yep. And what about on your day off? What's your favourite way to spend a day off, mate?
Look, now I'm in Sydney, which is where I grew up. I like going down to Clovelly and just jumping in the ocean. I'll get out and do a training session, go for a bike ride or something like that. Have a nice brekkie and then go and jump in the ocean and, try and get out in the sun and just, chill out. It's pretty simple, but it's something I've done for a long time, while I've been traveling and working in high performance.
Yep. And moving more to the more recent time of your career, you mentioned you had a couple of years off and did some study. What made you decide to study that course was it Masters of Leadership? And what have you gained from it now that you're back in the field?
Yeah, well, so end of 2019, our family moved to Canada because my wife, got a really big role up there, and I decided to do some study, which I hadn't for a while. And it was a really great course, a really good practical course. But what it taught me, that I think the biggest thing is that leadership is a skill, and it's a skill like any other skill. And what you find, not just in corporate, but in sport as well, is that because you're good at something, you're very often promoted into a leadership role. But you need leadership development as much as you need goal kicking development or being taught how to tackle. Just because your skills, you're really proficient at certain skills that make you a good player, doesn't mean you become a good leader. So that's something that I, not just learned in the course that I did, but, I reflect on that in my time in sport, and it's absolutely the case, is that leaders need to be developed, and they need growth, and they need help to become better leaders.
And for the athletes listening in that want to be a strong leader, what would be your advice in terms of developing leadership, or maybe parents as well, or coaches of junior teams? What would be some of your favourite ways to develop leadership in younger developing players?
Yeah, look, I think sort of self-knowledge is really important. So who am I as a person and a player within my team? How do my teammates sort of see me? How do I see myself? And really having, being crystal clear on your identity as a leader, whether it is a player or a practitioner, and being yourself. Don't be someone you're not. That's one of my biggest sort of pieces of advice. But be the best version of yourself. Like I'm not a ranter and raver, and I never have been. Whereas I work with an Irish guy now who's an unbelievable strength and conditioning coach, but he likes to get into the players and really motivating. But that's not me, and I understand that that's never been me. I do it a different way, but I try and do it as well as I can. So don't be someone you're not, but try and be the best version of yourself, and understand what that version is, and try and hone it and develop it as well as you can.
And is it building, working out your leadership style? Is that through practice, do you think, and what feels natural, or is it a matter of, like you said, reading about different leadership styles and then starting to work out where you sort of sit in terms of your style?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It would be, I think, doing a little bit of exploration and reading about different leaders. But another really, something that a lot of people don't do is seeking feedback. So, if you're working in a team or in an environment, go and talk to 3 people that you really respect, and put together sort of 4 or 5 questions about yourself, and ask them to write it down, and then sit with them and get them to talk you through their responses, and get some, detailed and insightful feedback from people that you respect. And it's amazing how, like you might just get 2 or 3 absolute, gold nuggets, and that can help then spur you on to your next stage of development.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That's great advice for anyone that wants to just be better at what they do, whether it be family life, work, or for those on the sporting field. Moving more to this year, mate, what are you excited about? What's on the horizon for 2022 for you?
Excuse me. Yeah, look, we've got a bit of time off now, which I'm really looking forward to, just chilling out. But, as I say, we've got a really strong plan around what our preseason looks like in 2023. We learn a lot at the end of the season about us as a team. As a disappointing exit, but we really learnt from that. And there's some real excitement even already, about us going into 2023. A lot of our players have got to get through a Rugby League World Cup first, and hopefully they do well there and don't get any injuries. But we're really, really excited and optimistic about what 23 can be for the Roosters.
And what does it look like managing the Roosters boys while they're playing for international duties? Is there much communication with yourself and their international S&C, or how does that look and manage?
Yeah, look, we sort of, you want to keep tabs on you guys, because they're our best players who are you're handing over to other practitioners and other coaches. But you don't want to feel that you're overly sort of burdening them with I want to report after every training session. You've got to trust in these organisations as well. But Yeah, like that's going to be probably our biggest challenge of the first third of the season is managing our World Cup players, because most of them don't get back until after Christmas, and then we've only got 5 or 6 weeks to get them ready for round one. So yeah, it's going to be really tight, and we're going to have to our programs and attention to detail is going to have to be really high, but. Yeah, if we can sort of get them to the line for round 1 and 2, and hopefully they're sort of well rested and recovered from the World Cup, and we start building our season.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast, mate, and sharing with us your experiences, journey throughout your career as well, but also I'm a big believer that success leaves clues, and you've shared with us a lot of gems that's worked for you over your career that no doubt practitioners can start applying into their processes and systems. So thanks heaps for sharing about your journey, as well as discussing culture and leadership, two tricky topics to discuss. There's obviously a lot of nuance with those, but it was great to go into some good detail around those two topics. For anyone who wants to follow up and ask any questions, mate, is there anywhere to get in contact?
Absolutely, yeah. You can get to me via LinkedIn.
Yep.
I'm on LinkedIn, so yeah, absolutely. Quite happy to, if anyone wants to reach out just to have a chat, and then, we can take it off LinkedIn somewhere else if that's the case. But that's probably the best way to contact me, I reckon.
And was there anything that we missed during the interview, mate, that you'd like to share? Any topics or maybe something that we didn't cover in terms of culture and leadership?
Probably not, Jack. I think, yeah, it's really it's an important area, and it's an area that all organisations need to think about, and not just it's not enough these days to get who you consider a good bunch of people and put them in an organisation or put them in a department and hope that things are going to be okay. There needs to be an intentional process to try and develop leadership and culture in particular. And that obviously, is strengthened with good leaders. So it's understanding that leaders, as I said, leadership is a skill. So you need to develop your leaders, you need to work with them. And then you need to be intentional about how you want your culture to look. And culture, quite simply, is, what we do every single day. So, you need to have a bit of a deep dive in what are our processes and what are our behaviours, and do we provide each other with the feedback to enable change there? But don't just let it happen. Don't just think it's going to happen. You need to really be intentional about making it happen. That's probably the biggest thing for me, I reckon.
Yeah, it's an empowering philosophy, because you do hear quite commonly in our field that leadership might not be a skill, and you've either got it or you don't. So to hear that it is something like goal kicking that you can most definitely practice and get better at, particularly for not only the current people in leadership roles, but maybe future leaders as well that want to be a leader. It's not something that's given to you. You can actually work on it, which is great, mate. So thank you again, and thank you for all the listeners. If you've tuned in halfway through this live chat, make sure to watch the YouTube show. The recording will be living in our YouTube channel once we finish this live chat, and then we'll post the podcast in the next couple of weeks. So stay updated on our social media. But thanks again, David, for jumping on, and thanks for all the listeners. Our next live chat was with Scott Dickinson. That will be next Friday, September 30th at 3:30 p.m. So I'll see you guys then.